This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on February 19, 2026. Jaron Turnage, licensed professional counselor, was our subject matter expert presenter. The goal of the Ask a Professional series is to support TSF subrecipients as they help families better understand the different types of perinatal professionals they may meet during pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. This episode of the Q&A series focused on mental health counseling services. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and meet our expert. Jaron Turnage is a licensed mental health professional who works closely with moms in pregnancy and postpartum. She's passionate about helping women navigate the emotional highs and lows, identity shifts, and relationship changes that often come with this season. As a mom of two little boys, Jaron has walked through her own challenging postpartum experiences, which opened her eyes to how desperately mothers need more support, understanding, and then honest conversations about mental health. Jaron is super knowledgeable and just kind, and I'm so excited that she's here to talk to you all today about mental health. So, welcome, Jaron.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Anything else you want to tell us about yourself, Jaron, just as we get started?
No, I'm just excited to be here, excited to share and meet and network with some of you guys, provide some resources. Just happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. All right. So, we're going to start with questions that are based on the orientation and scope of a postpartum mental health specialist, just to kind of jump into it. So, Jaron, tell us, what does a postpartum or perinatal mental health therapist do? And then how can they support someone during pregnancy and then after birth? Because it's kind of different, right?
Yes, there's definitely different things that we touch on during sessions. So overall, you're going to hear me talk about this kind of repetitively throughout the presentation, just providing a safe, non-judgmental space. I think that is the key foundation to therapy in general, but specifically to pregnancy and postpartum populations, just because it's such a big transition, and people often think, especially moms, as we enter into motherhood, that we are wired and we should have it all figured out, and that we should automatically know what we're doing. And so when we don't and we are overwhelmed and we have a lot of questions and maybe we're suffering in some way, there's a lot of guilt and shame and embarrassment tied to all of that. And so providing a space, maybe the only space in your life where you can come and just be vulnerable and bring all of it and lay it all out in the open, is the foundation to everything. And then helping them understand what exactly they're feeling and why. So some of the physiological and biological things that are happening internally and influencing how we feel, and giving specific tools to cope with the stress, worry, the big emotions, and the transition and the identity changes that we'll talk about in a little bit, and just overall supporting mom and dad's adjustment to parenthood.
Okay, awesome. So, tell us a little bit about the pregnancy specific support.
So my one of my favorite parts about supporting a pregnant mom is the birth planning. If I get to be a part of that process, anticipating what she wants her labor and birth and postpartum to look like, and trying to set up things, have resources ahead of time to make that as possible as um, getting everything in line. So whether that's like lactation support that she may need, a doula if she's needing extra support during labor, and postpartum doulas, um, a sleep coach if she thinks that would be helpful, or dietitians and nutritionists, just making sure that she's eating enough because a lot of mamas are very undernourished. Just processing expectations, and also realistic expectations, right? Of like, this is your plan, this is your ideal, but also, what if it doesn't go exactly that way, and learning to manage that anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important to like know about the types of help out there,
Yeah.
because you don't know what you're going to need. So that's
Right.
great.
Yeah.
And then what about the postpartum specific support?
Yeah, so we might be processing any birth trauma if that's been their experience. I have a lot of mamas who have had NICU stays with their babies, and so working through that and how that impacted their anxiety and their connection with their spouse, and how they are coping with that sometimes in very different ways. Relationship stress, the communication with your partner is usually very different. The quality time decreases, so learning how to reconnect, and then kind of the same thing, but on the back end of identifying resources that they may need, and strengthening their either their support system that is currently involved, or gathering new support systems in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. So many big shifts.
Hmm.
Great. Okay, so this section we've called "Is this normal?" Right? Like we hate
Yeah.
the term normal, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no normal that fits every family. But, Jaren and I have talked a lot about like people just want to know, like, does this happen to everybody? Am I
Mhm.
on this lonely island? And so that's kind of what some of these questions will help try to answer.
Yeah.
So, Jaren, what are some common emotional and mental health changes after birth?
There are huge emotional and hormonal shifts happening right after birth. Um, you have hormonally, you have your estrogen and progesterone dropping dramatically right after birth. Adrenaline is usually carrying you for the first 3 days, and you have that birth high, as some people call it, and then the sleep deprivation kicks in and you crash. And so that makes it really hard to regulate emotions, respond um, appropriately sometimes. You are feeling overly overwhelmed and overly maybe sensitive for the first time. You are anxious and tearful. There's some mood swings. All of that is really common. How you see yourself as the majority of the time has shifted dramatically. Someone once said that every time a baby is born, a mother is born too. And I just think of myself before my children and how I was a completely just a different person. And so, how you see yourself and how you connect with others, whether that's your spouse, your family, your friends, particularly those who do not have kids, you can begin to relate to them a lot differently. So, a lot of shifts relationally there.
Absolutely. Okay. So this is the big question, right? What's the difference between baby blues, postpartum anxiety, and postpartum depression when you talk about a lot of those shifts right after birth?
Yeah. So, baby blues is definitely influenced hormonally. A lot, I would say the majority of moms experience this. It develops right after birth, crying easily, sensitive to things, feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and usually subsides on its own in the first couple of weeks. Postpartum anxiety, persistent and ongoing worry, racing thoughts, feeling on edge, fearful that something bad will happen to the baby, but not because there is an intent to harm the baby. There's a lot of what if questions. What if I fall with the baby? What if I'm feeding the baby and they choke? And so there can be and we'll touch on this here and again in a second, but there's this fear of almost being alone with the baby or connecting too much because it is all on you if or when something bad happens, and that's just anxiety speaking. It can develop during pregnancy and even up to 12 months postpartum. Um, and postpartum depression lasts longer and feels heavier than the baby blue. So this is surpassing the 2 week mark, and there is low energy, numbness, irritability, but persistent sadness is the core feature here. And there can be self-harming thoughts, suicidal thoughts. This can also develop during pregnancy and up to 12 months postpartum, and even longer in some instances if there's like further transition. So if you're returning to work, or you have lost support, or if you've stopped breastfeeding, there's a big hormonal shift there too. And so all of those would um, definitely benefit from some support.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to point out too that you mentioned a few times with both postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, it's not just a postpartum thing. Like it can develop in pregnancy too,
Mhm.
because I think a lot of people think like, oh, this is just something that happens after baby comes because
Right. Right.
mom has these big hormonal shifts and identity shifts and things like that. But I would imagine, especially with like high risk pregnancies, it would be more,
A lot of stress. Yeah,
yeah.
a lot of stress, and we take into account their history of mental health as well, like their individual history and their family history. And if you've experienced anxiety, depression in the past, you are at a higher risk for developing that in the postpartum period too.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so kind of some follow-on questions. A little bit of this are going to overlap, but go a little bit deeper just into the common signs of both postpartum depression and postpartum
Hmm.
anxiety.
So I wanted to be as specific as possible and just lay out the full criteria here. So as you can see, the core feature. So this is at greater than 2 weeks. So we want to give that 2 week mark of like just adjusting, help like allowing hormones to stabilize a little bit, allowing yourself to adjust to the transition a little bit. But anything kind of lasting longer than that that hasn't really sorted itself out is something to dive into and kind of maybe seek support. Um, and some clinical advice from. So persistent sadness, like I said, that is the kind of the key feature here. There's an emptiness, hopelessness. Sleep or appetite changes is a huge one. You want to sleep all the time. Um, or appetite, you're overeating or not eating. It can kind of look either way. Loss of interest in just the day-to-day stuff that once brought you joy. Guilt is a huge one. Just I'm a bad parent. Nothing I do is right. I'm not worthy of this baby. Poor concentration, so memory is all over the place when you're already, that's tricky because postpartum is a period where you already have baby brain anyway. And so this is just really not able to kind of sort your thoughts. And then thoughts of death or suicide. And then I think the next slide is postpartum
Yep.
specific features. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, so feeling disconnected from your baby, just like it is more of a responsibility and not a relationship. So feeling more like kind of like a servant to your baby instead of this is a new relationship that I have. Intense guilt, like I just mentioned, emotional numbness and crying frequently. So the biggest things is I'm tearful all the time, I'm crying all the time, I feel so guilty, I'm a bad parent. That's what I hear the most frequently with this.
Okay. And then postpartum anxiety.
Yeah. Once again, we're looking at that over 2 week mark. Excessive, uncontrollable worry to where you are almost kind of unable to care for your baby at times. Your sleep difficulty because of your racing thoughts, because of the intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, or just being on edge, on high alert all the time. So your nervous system is in high gear 24/7, and that restlessness, even when the baby is sleeping and is visibly fine, you are you are worked up. You're not able to rest even when baby is resting.
Okay. And then some specific signs here.
Yeah, so that compulsive checking is a huge one. And this can get clinically, if you're looking at like postpartum OCD versus postpartum anxiety, they look similar in this way because there are compulsions to relieve that anxiety. So I'm going to be checking. I remember with my first, he had a my first little boy, I put an owlet monitor on him so I could like make sure that he was breathing well, and I was just constantly checking him and not able to rest well. Um, and so checking breathing, checking monitors, just that restlessness on edge all the time, like I said, fear of being alone with the baby. So going back to, I'm like, I wouldn't be afraid that I'm going to harm the baby. I'm afraid that harm is coming to the baby, and then it is my fault because I'm the only one here, or I'm the main caregiver. And then a lot of times, clients are having panic attacks along with this.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my question was like the intrusive thoughts. How do you distinguish that, like the OCD from the anxiety? Or like, can that be part of both of it? Both of them.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's very specific. So when we get to like the screening, there's screening tools for OCD. And a lot of the moms that I've worked with that do have postpartum OCD have a history of having OCD prior. And so they are actually pretty aware of like, hey, this feels familiar. Um, but yeah, the intrusive thoughts, it can be tricky. It takes a lot of conversations and very specific details of like, okay, what is the thought saying? What is your compulsion? And when you do challenge that, is there something we can intervene, like an anxiety or stress management tool that calms that? So it takes a while to distinguish that. So
Okay.
that's super helpful, but it's tricky.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it goes actually into our next question, right? And so like distinguishing what's normal stress versus postpartum stress or
Yeah.
postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. So how do you work with families to figure out if what they're experiencing is normal or if it's something more?
Yeah. So assess, normalize and assess. Yeah. So first we kind of go over psychoeducation stuff. So I want them to be aware of how their hormones are affecting their mood. I want them to be aware that their sleep deprivation is destabilizing their emotions and their ability to regulate. I want them to know that their nutrition and overall the care of their body affects their agitation levels. And so we are talking about all the things that are common experiences in postpartum and how that's impacting their ability to function. And then it goes to assessment of, okay, what you're feeling, how intense is it? How long has it been happening? And how much is it affecting the day-to-day functioning? So there's there's the line is like, okay, are you still able to function and get things done, even though your feelings are maybe more intense than they were before pre-baby, or but the functioning impact is really where we do the assessment.
Okay. That's a great distinguishing feature, I think. Okay, so one of my favorite questions that I
Mine
did
too.
not realize before becoming a mother, how does
Yeah.
sleep deprivation impact postpartum mental health? Ooh.
Yeah, significantly. Um, so for me, I would argue that proper sleep is the biggest regulator of your nervous system. When we have proper sleep, we shift into parasympathetic rest or restore mode. So our stress hormone, our cortisol is lowered, our heart rate and blood pressure is stabilized, our brain is working really hard to consolidate memory and process emotions. And there's a lot of physical repair that's happening while we rest too. So if you can imagine postpartum and you have a wound inside you the size of a dinner plate, it is really essential to take that restorative and repair sleep and have that consistently. When we are not in that mode, we are in the opposite. And everyone is probably familiar with the fight or flight mode. And so when we have fragmented sleep, we have heightened mood swings, our anxiety and intrusive thoughts worsen. There's a higher risk for postpartum depression and anxiety. Sleep is not a luxury, and I think our society has made it that way in postpartum. It's like that we normalize, like, oh, yeah, well, you got 3 hours, I got two. It's almost like this, war, story that, I've toughed it out. And it's like, it's not a luxury. It is very much a nervous system stabilizer that is really important. And I work with a lot of moms and partners to get them to understand even small changes can dramatically help. Like, so it's actually napping when the baby naps. And I know that's frustrating for a lot of moms to hear. It was for me. So I'm like, well, he's napping in the car and I'm driving. So how do I? But even if it's just not even every day, but trying to be intentional about resting when you're able to, and then sharing the night shift if that's at all possible, talking to your partner about like you take these hours, I take, and when I have a history of being a birth and postpartum doula, and when I've worked with families about, okay, this is how can this work where you can let mom rest? The most successful and emotionally balanced and healthy couples have been those who share nighttime duties. A little bit of sleep goes a long way. A little extra sleep goes a long way in the postpartum season.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's something that's really hard too, especially if you don't have a lot of extra supports, or, maybe your partner works the night shift,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
there are just so many extra things. And so I think, like, unfortunately, that's something that compounds too, right? Like, the more sleep you lose, the worse it gets.
yes, yeah.
And so it's really tough. Okay. So next we'll go to, how do you support parents who don't feel an immediate bond with their babies? You talked a little bit about this
Hmm.
a minute ago, but tell us a little more.
I mean, I think validating and normalizing how common it is not to have an immediate connection. And so, like I said, people come in with this, and if this is their experience, there's a lot of shame wrapped up in that. We are once again kind of wired to, and I think this comes from comparison too. We see on maybe social media all the highlight reels of mom holding her baby, and there's a beautiful caption, and just this, the highlights of her newborn period. But it's really common to not have that. So we explore like what could be hindering that connection. Is it stress from all of the newness and the overwhelm? Is it anxiety? So maybe you're not spending a lot of one-on-one time with your baby because there's that fear. Or is it lack of sleep and you are just exhausted so to the point where you can't really enjoy the moments with your baby? And then so we identify that and kind of build rhythms and routines to build connection over time. So an example of that would be I would encourage a mom to take one feeding a day. It doesn't matter whether she's breastfeeding, bottle feeding, one feeding a day to be really present with her baby. Put your phone away. You're not sitting in front of the TV. You're not doom scrolling. You're not distracted by anything. You are listening to your baby's sounds and looking at all their features and singing to them or talking to them. And just even that little pocket of connection that over time can be really helpful. Yeah.
Right. I love that. And I love too, Jaren, that you always talk about making it realistic, right? It's like just one feeding a day. Focus
Yeah.
on, doing it one feeding a day. And then you can
Yeah.
kind of add from there. Because again, it's like moms don't need one more thing to be overwhelmed about, that they're going
Right.
to feel like,
Yeah.
hey, I didn't do it today, or I didn't do it well enough, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
love that. Okay, so now we're going to shift more into talking about identity and emotional shifts for parents. And so, is it normal to grieve those parts of life before becoming a parent?
Absolutely. Everything has shifted the way you feel, not just how your body looks, but how you feel in your body. Your energy level, your sleep, your priorities, your the way that you connect and communicate with your partner and your family. Everything is a little bit different. And so it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It doesn't mean you're not thankful for the role that you've been given. Doesn't mean you don't love your baby. I still grieve my the ability to sleep as a full without being interrupted, or being able to like nap when I got home from work. That's okay. I still love my babies, but it is. I think there's a lot of guilt tied up with this too, of like this equals this, and if I miss this, then what does that say about this season of my life? And two things can be true at the same time.
Sure, absolutely. I know for me, it's always been like not being able to run in the store and grab three things within 5 minutes and be back out. It's like, no, it's like a
Oh,
whole
no, it
profession.
takes triple the time. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it's right. Like, of course, I still love my son, but now things
Mhm.
just feel a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. How does becoming a parent impact identity and relationships? Again, some of this overlaps, but anything
hmm
else specific?
So, um, like I said, the connections are changed, not just with your partner and with your family and friends, particularly those. I remember some of my friends still, they hadn't had children by the time I had my first one. And so just like finding things to talk about that, because my whole world was centered around my baby and what was happening. And so relating to friends and family can be different. Maybe if you're setting limits and boundaries with them for the first time. I work a lot with moms who maybe didn't have the best relationship with their parents growing up, but they really want them to be involved grandparents. And so navigating like, how do I set healthy boundaries with them? How can they visit and it not like wreck my whole day? So working on that and just the way you feel about yourself and your body and your new role that is shifting. And so once we kind of talked about you're grieving and that's okay, your relationship with your spouse or your partner specifically, there are new disagreements, there's more stress, there's less sleep, quality time is not there. um, you have to be really intentional about if there's a serious conversation that needs to be had, you have to schedule that. And so just a lot of I get a lot of people describing their relationship with their partners like two ships passing in the night or feeling like roommates and missing that, grieving that connection specifically is a big one. So just trying to find ways to reconnect with that and finding ways to name what you feel like you are missing about yourself. And then finding ways to kind of embrace your new role, but find those pieces in your new role, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really big opportunity that all of our people on this call have with their families, right? Is that like you all are like what I would call the baby people, right? Like y'all are
Mhm.
already talking with them about like what does it mean to shift into this new role? And so it's like y'all are that one constant that like you're expecting that they're going to become completely different. Their mom, their partner, their friends are not expecting how much they're going to change. But you all
Right.
have a huge like opportunity to like maintain that constancy for them and let them know like, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we'll shift a little bit more into signs and when to reach out. So like we've kind of talked about, what's normal versus when you're not coping with things and the stress very well. So now more into when do you need to get help? And so when should a parent reach out to a mental health therapist?
Yeah, so I would say anytime that they are feeling overwhelmed, not like themselves, disconnected, anytime, once again, back to that 2 week period, anytime this is a prolonged feeling longer than 2 weeks, if the feelings are really intense or they are just constant to where they're unmanageable, um, disconnected from yourself or your baby is key. And then just the day-to-day coping is too much. So we kind of go back to like how are your feelings impacting the functioning in the day-to-day. So if you see I'm bogged down, I'm low on energy, but it's heavier than that. It's I feel I don't know who I am right now. I don't know what my role is. I feel lost. I feel disconnected. Um, and I think there's this misconception of I have to be in crisis to seek out mental health support, or things have to be bad enough, and maybe they're not that bad, or I'm going to wait till they get better. Surely they'll get better. And I think, it doesn't have to be that way. Like you deserve support at every stage. And so if we can insert support and resources early on, we can maybe prevent a crisis from happening or allowing you to get to a breaking point. So I think sometimes the earlier the better.
Absolutely. And so sometimes, like, even as new parents, they may not be able to, express um, those thoughts and feelings. So when we think about being professionals who are working with these families, when should they consider referring someone to a mental health therapist? And maybe, like, how can they have that conversation too, to be like, hey, I'm noticing you're struggling with this.
Yeah.
What if we consider meeting with Jaren?
Yeah. Yeah. So, if they are noticing in their appointments or their interactions with them that these emotions are persistent, and like you said, like it's sometimes hard for when it's you feeling overwhelmed, it's hard to voice that or even kind of acknowledge that's where you're at in the moment. And so, someone outside and has a more objective view may be able to catch that a bit earlier. So, if you're noticing there's persistent anxiety, irritability, or sadness, if you see them having language around or a body language around difficulty bonding with their baby, if they're not if they you can read the room, you can identify when someone is struggling with their baby. When the overwhelm is so much that the daily life is impacted. And obviously, if there's a risk of harm to themselves, someone else, or their baby, that would require an emergency referral. But like I just said, an early referral it can be so helpful. And just maybe, maybe it's not necessarily they have a diagnosis, but they just need some more support in validating their experience to know that they're not alone, to have someone help them build connections. And create a community and a village for them. And so early referrals are key for me.
Yeah, I love that you don't have to be in crisis to get help or be seen or heard.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so a little bit more on the clinical side. Tell us about some tools that may help identify when more support may be needed, because sometimes it may be difficult to decide whether their stress is, an amount that they can cope with or not. And everyone's threshold is a little bit different for that. So tell us about some screening tools.
Yeah, so these are just a handful of clinical tools that EPDS is specific to postnatal depression. The PHQ is a very commonly used depression scale. The GAD and the PASS are anxiety screenings. The PASS, the perinatal anxiety screening, specifically asks about um, like mm, I'm trying to so let me move on to the Y box and the OCR. That the OCIR specifically talks about like the compulsion checking, the monitors, the breathing, that type of stuff. This is not if you score something, you automatically have this diagnosis. This is one tool to where it just helps us gather information to where when we have a structured clinical interview, we kind of know what to dig into, to ask more questions about. And these are not something that I would suggest anyone find and like print off themselves and self-score and like diagnose themselves. And so these are clinical tools. That's just one part of the puzzle that um, once you have the information, your provider would go over them with you and walk you through kind of what next steps are and what they mean. But this is once again, this is not something because it uses some kind of therapeutic language that might be confusing to people. And so walking through that with a provider who can break everything down is really important.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question was like, what maybe training or something do you need to receive to be able to use these? But I think even like you said, just like even looking through them and having a frame of reference of like what they're looking
Yeah,
for, not necessarily using it as a checkbox and being like, hey, you check 4 out of 5, so like, we have a problem. But just as a frame of reference, I think could probably be helpful. Would you say
very.
that would be an appropriate use?
Yes, very much. I think it can be if you were to working through this by yourself, not only could it could potentially be confusing, but also shaming because a lot of these are have very specific questions. And it can cause a lot of emotional things and so an emotional response and so it really does need to be worked through with someone who can explain this is why we're asking this and like this is part of the criteria that it meets and just to kind of explaining and breaking it down for them. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And then so moving on, what are some red flags that should never be ignored? Because I think that's like partially part of the reason we wanted to include some of the screening things, right? Is that like that does kind of help bring some of those things to light.
Yeah, definitely. So um yeah, to keep me on track. Thank you. Thoughts of self-harm is the biggest one to yourself, someone else, your baby. That always requires a referral right away. Feeling completely numb, unable to care for your baby, intense anxiety or panic attacks, and mood swings, confusion, or agitation that are not manageable. So any of those would be a very good reason to refer immediately.
Okay, awesome. And then so when we think in terms of providing that trauma-informed care too, sometimes we don't just want to be like, hey, do you want to hurt yourself today? Right? Like, how can some non-licensed therapeutic providers kind of bridge that gap and still have those
Yeah.
conversations, but like assess in an objective way?
Yeah. So um, I think listening without judgment. Hearing them and not immediately putting your 2 cents in or just sitting and being present with them and actually taking time to build a relationship with them, asking the hard questions. I know it may feel awkward to ask about suicidal self-harm, psychosis, and a lot of people, even providers, feel uncomfortable with that, but it's essential. I think the more comfortable we get with saying like, how is sleep? Like how are your thoughts? Like how are you dealing with all this? Like is there ever a time that you're not feeling like yourself? Is there ever a time that you don't want to be here? Um, I mean, I think you do that, like your energy that you bring into that conversation is really what matters. But you do need to ask the hard questions. If you're uncomfortable and it feels taboo to the client, they're going to feel like it's uncomfortable for them to voice that. And they're going to feel like maybe they're not asking because they're not equipped to hear my answer. And
Mhm.
so I think it's essential for everyone to just kind of get used to asking the tough questions because we might be missing an opportunity to serve someone who's really in need. Validating their experience instead of dismissing, and I don't mean dismissing intentionally. I think that we use what we perceive as encouraging language, but it comes off as dismissive. So, for example, you shouldn't feel that way. Your baby's home and he's healthy now. And that is really quick to cut someone off who might be really needing some help and about to share something with you. Giving unsolicited advice is another big one that I see a lot in motherhood in general, but even with providers. Um, just don't do it. Like, unless someone is asking you specifically for advice, I would even then be very mindful of what I share because your family dynamic, your resources, your hormones, like everything individual to you is not their story. And so, that goes to my next point of just point them in the right direction. You serve people well when you know your resources, when you know your local people, you know you've made relationships with them, you can confidently refer and stand in the gap for that client and say like I know her, I know that she knows her stuff and I know that she will serve you well and so I'm handing you off to her. No statewide resources. Don't send a new overwhelmed mom or dad off with a thumbs up and say like go Google, good luck. Like give them specific names and people to reach out to.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And it does become so hard because like you said, it's like With the sleep thing, right? It's almost this badge of honor of like, oh, I only slept 2 hours at a time for the
Mhm.
first 4 months.
Yeah.
And so many people, it's almost like you want to normalize how someone's feeling, but it minimizes how they're feeling at the same time. And so I
Yeah.
think it's really hard for anyone who's had that experience to be like, okay, comparing metrics, almost. But it's like you said, everyone's threshold is different. And so that's
Mhm.
really hard. But I do think that's a strength of like everyone on our call is that they care about their clients. And so asking those hard questions and like being involved is what they do naturally. And so it's maybe just an encouragement for them to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to just some questions about what therapy may actually look like for clients.
Sure.
So, how do you support parents who feel overwhelmed and maybe isolated?
Yeah, so I'm actually listening to a book that talks about in Western European culture how we have really isolated ourselves because we are one of the few cultures that no longer commonly live with extended family. We don't have grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins in our home or living right beside us like very often. So a lot of people don't have either support system right there with them, or they don't have it at all. And so normalizing the feeling of being isolated and it feels hard because it is hard. We weren't really meant to do this alone, but so many of us are. And so finding that support, whether it is family or close friends, that maybe that connection and that support can be strengthened through just communicating your needs of like, hey, can you do this for me? I know that's, takes some vulnerability to ask for help, but we need to do that. We need to advocate for ourselves. But also, what organizations or groups or, you know, places in your local community can you intentionally build your community and your village with, even if that's not family? Um, the day-to-day stuff can feel so daunting. So breaking things down into small steps. Example, I work a lot with moms of like, hey, I haven't taken my baby out of the house yet. I'm afraid to like drive with them in the car. I don't want, it makes me nervous to go run errands. And so how do we break this thing down into one step at a time where you can do things that you need to do and want to do and not feel so overwhelmed? Um, Building routines that feel realistic and not perfect. I think this goes back to the comparison game that we play a lot with ourselves of whatever is doable for you and your family dynamic is what we aim for. That's sustainable, that's going to bring emotional balance and rest to you. If you see a mom on the internet that is waking up early and doing an hour of tummy time and then baking her sourdough and then coming back and her whole day is just so structured and perfect and beautiful and peaceful, that's probably not real. And so let's figure out what works for you and what feels right. And a lot of us try to shove pre-baby life into life with a newborn, and that doesn't work either. And so trying to find the balance of what are some things that we can kind of integrate into this season, but still appreciate the slowness and the stillness that this season is supposed to bring?
Yeah. You just brought up something that I'm going to go on a quick tangent that we
Yeah.
didn't even plan for, but social media.
Yeah.
Oh, how do you help parents navigate what looks normal on social media versus what's realistic for them?
I often encourage a social media cleanse.
Hmm.
Usually in pregnancy. It started for me in pregnancy, because I had insomnia, right? I would just be up scrolling, usually buying baby things, and I'd be like, "Oh, I need to join a mom's group," or "Oh, I need to look at this," or "This influencer is pregnant too," and it starts this whole awful rabbit hole where you are constantly like, "I'm not as joyful as this person. I'm not as productive as this person." And it's just, I encourage any person or platform that doesn't bring you like good education or true contentment or like validation of like, hey, whatever season you're in is um, however you feel like is validating for you, and it leads you to a comparison. Delete them. Delete them. I don't care how funny they are or like how many followers they have. I don't care if yeah, I am big on you need to protect your space and your peace, and anything that interrupts that in this like very vulnerable and sacred period needs to go. So I'm big on delete social media altogether if you have to, but if that's not if that's not something you want to do, do a deep dive cleanse into your people that you follow and just be very intentional about who you're listening to.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more realistic for most people than getting rid of it completely, right?
Yeah.
And that is just like
Yeah.
being more intentional about the way you use it. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so on to one of my favorite questions. What have your clients said have like been the most helpful part of coming to therapy?
Yeah, so I asked a few of them, and so the quotes are: I don't have to pretend, I don't have to show up and pretend that I have it all together. Even in some of their family dynamics that they are close to their family, they still aren't able to fully be completely transparent about what they're struggling with, because they receive unsolicited advice from their mom or their aunt or someone, and so. Um, they can just show up and be completely themselves and not feel judged for it. Helping them understand their feelings instead of fighting them or avoiding them is a big one. Where like, let's talk about all of the things that are influencing why you're feeling right now. Let's break them down. Let's name them. I'm not broken and I'm not alone is a big one. And just feeling like a lot of a lot of parents feel like I'm the only one struggling with this. Why is this so hard for me? And so, like, just educating them on how common these struggles are can be really, really helpful and relieving. And then just strategy and stress management tools to help them calm down when overwhelm hits in the moment. So, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of grounding, um, a lot of self-care works that require some effort, but long term are really helpful to your nervous system.
Okay, great. And then beyond some of the therapeutic tools, what are some like practical resources that you often recommend alongside seeing a therapist?
Yeah, so postpartum groups, there are some great ones online. There are some usually local, but even if it's not postpartum specific groups, maybe there's mommy and me groups or places where moms can go and just connect with moms in the same season of life. And that can just be really helpful to just have a conversation of like, oh, our babies are around the same age and we're probably struggling with the same stuff. So finding groups for them to connect to, trusted parenting education resources, books and podcasts, and that's all on the resource page that you put together. Practical supports like doulas, like I mentioned before, nutritionists and dietitians to make sure mom's being nourished and getting enough in, is particularly if she's breastfeeding or pumping. Um, any you know other med management resources maybe if they have taken medication in the past and that's something they want to explore, just helping connect them with whatever need, and then crisis resources if ever things feel urgent in the moment.
Okay, awesome. And then if you had to boil it down, what would you want
Mm.
every new parent to hear about postpartum mental health? Like you've got a 20-second elevator pitch.
There's so much, and so I've tried to I try to put it into three bullet points, but there's so much that I just want to tell moms. You're not alone. You're not doing this wrong. Postpartum emotions are so complicated. You can be overwhelmed and still love your baby. You can be grieving old parts of your life and still be really grateful for the role that you're in. Getting support may be really hard, but it's not a failure. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It means you are actually really strong, and you deserve just as much support and care as your baby.
Absolutely. Love that. Okay, and then last question for this section. What should clients know about confidentiality, safety, and then mandated reporting when they're seeing, a mental health professional or in general, just another community service professional?
Yeah, so therapy and these spaces are safe and should be, and your therapist specifically will not share information without your consent or permission. However, there are exceptions that are all related to safety. If you are in danger of hurting yourself or someone else, your baby, um, anyone's at risk, if a child, elder, or vulnerable person is being abused or neglected, we have a legal duty to report and to keep people safe, and that is what mandated reporting is. And so always like to kind of preface that at the first session of like everything you share is safe. However, it is my job to keep you and others safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and again, that still is like you caring for them in a way
Yeah.
too, that like make sure that they're protected and that you're
Right.
protected. Absolutely. Okay. And then our last section is just we're going to talk a little bit about accessing mental health care and some different avenues to be able to do that. So, how
Yeah.
can someone find a qualified postpartum mental health therapist or just really perinatal, pregnancy specific mental health therapist?
Yeah, so some trusted directories. PSI is a great one. Psychology Today has always kind of been my go-to. I use it probably weekly or every other week for referrals. It lets you filter by insurance, gender of the therapist, the topic, telehealth or in person, some hybrid stuff's on there. There's groups on there. So just a lot of information that's really, really user friendly, easy to navigate. And so those are my top two. And then connecting with your OB, your providers, your midwife, PCP, your lactation person, they should all have resources and connections with therapists who work specifically with new parents. And if they don't, you should encourage them to do that.
Absolutely. Okay. And I will send out the things that you just mentioned to her on our resource page that we made. So you all will get all of those directories as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what are some common barriers to postpartum mental health care? And then how can the people on this call help reduce some of those barriers?
Yeah. So time and energy is a huge one. Caring for a baby is time consuming. You have no extra energy. And so even booking an appointment that you know would benefit you feels like one more thing on the list and it can feel daunting. Costs and insurance limits. Not everyone has coverage. It's sometimes tricky to find a provider who takes your insurance or has availability for you. Um, Childcare issues. Maybe you don't have someone to watch your baby when you attend an appointment. I do telehealth. Completely. And so I see a lot of moms with their babies. But sometimes if they have a toddler or an older child running around, it makes it a little more challenging to be completely present in the appointment. And so that's a huge barrier. Stigma or shame. They feel like a bad parent coming for support. They're like, I should be able to figure this out and I can't. And that's a huge hindrance for some people. And then just not knowing where to look. Like the resources are out there, but not a lot of people are talking about them, sharing them, and so just that lack of knowledge. So providers, we can normalize mental health care just by talking about it, by talking about postpartum mental health and acknowledging how difficult it is, and kind of opening that door for conversations to happen where mom can share, like, yes, actually, it has been really difficult for me in these ways. Offering flexible options like telehealth or shorter session times. For me, I've started integrating later evening times. So when mom's like, if there's a working partner who can come home and take care of the kids while mom attends an appointment, that can be helpful if that's something you're able to do. Providing clear referrals, just like I said before, being as specific as possible, and ideally having a relationship with the people that you're referring to. And then collaborating with other providers, doulas, therapists, nurse practitioners, lactation, all of the people in this field, being hands-on with moms, so that maybe potentially we could catch some of these um, these emotions early on and prevent something worse. So
Yeah.
networking,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I love all of those like actionable steps too, because it's like part of this call, right? Is like learning like what different types of perinatal professionals do and like building some of those relationships because it's like you said, like in our culture, like we don't have that village mentality anymore. So how do we build that, for moms,
Right.
especially particularly vulnerable moms
Yeah.
who don't have any of those natural supports? And so I think these are some really great ideas that you've offered. And I think that is the end of our prepared questions. So I'll go ahead and open up the floor. If anybody wants to come off mute, give us thoughts, other questions, maybe things that we made you think about. Feel free to put questions for Jaren in the chat. It can be, anything about mental health therapy or accessing it, how to help clients, be more comfortable with that. Anything that you all would like to ask. Well, we've got a few minutes left.
And if you don't have questions, that just means I did a really
Yeah.
good job covering everything. And I feel like there's surely something I've missed. So completely open.
Okay, Danielle says, I have a patient. She feels her baby hates her. Okay, what can you help her with?
Yeah, so that sounds like maybe some feeling disconnected, right? Feeling that more responsibility of a relationship. So how can we I would first ask, what is baby doing to make you think that she hates you? Is she just, is it the way that she's responding to some of your, like, like, is it during feedings? Is it during diaper changes? So maybe digging into when specifically that is happening. And then how can we integrate some connection points throughout the day, whether that's feeding or nighttime routine? Does it need to be kind of slowed down, quieted down so she can have some kind of intimate one-on-one time with her baby? Um, what are like, what's her support system like when she feels like I'm overwhelmed in this moment, baby hates me, I can't do anything right, and that guilt sets in, that like I'm a bad parent? Is it kind of headed toward like that postpartum depression of this is an overwhelming guilt. I'm not doing anything right. Baby must hate me. So I would explore several avenues, but also what's the support in her life like where when those moments happen, does she have someone to kind of tap in and say, go take a break? Like everyone's overwhelmed right now. Let me try to console baby, calm the baby down, and you can come back in and reconnect. And so there would be several kind of like follow-up questions that I would have about that statement of my baby hates me, because that's that feels heavy.
Mm, yeah. And even just Jaren, we were talking before everyone got on about like babies who are colicky, right? Like I had no idea how much a baby could cry,
Yeah.
and so like you said, a lot of that may be like the education of like,
Yeah.
because like if you're not exposed to babies or you haven't had a baby yet, like it can feel very overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Like you just don't know what's like a baseline. So
Yeah. And I think she said to me, share the office
yeah,
she
she said
called. And I was like,
yells at
hello.
her other family members to pick her up, and she's no longer crying.
Oh, well, that's happened to me too. So I, so she is consoled with other family members pick her up. And then I would also like to talk to the mom about like her overall kind of baseline of anxiety and energy that she's bringing in. I know that when I am overwhelmed, tapped out, touched out, frustrated, and I go to insert myself to do something for one of my kids, it's usually not going really smoothly, and sometimes they respond and feed off of me. Um, and so I would I would like to talk to her just about like what her overall baseline of emotions are right now, her overwhelm, her anxiety, her frustration tolerance. And like you said, there's so many factors that can influence a baby's temperament. Like, is she just kind of feeding off your frustration? Is there something upsetting her? Like we were talking about colicky babies. My baby was miserable for the first 6 months of his life. And as a mom, you're wired, like I'm wired to think I should be able to console him all the time. 100% of the time. I'm his mom. I birthed him. And that is not the case. And so that can feel really defeating and like, we're a team. Why are you not working with me here? And so letting people come in and give you a break if you can, to gather yourself um, and then you come back more level-headed, but also exploring, is there something agitating this baby? Like, are there gut issues? Is there teething? What else could be influencing this? Um, but like you said, like kind of that education piece of your baby doesn't hate you. Um, but there's something that is hindering that connection there, or um that relationship there. So I would want to dig into that.
Okay, and then we have another question from Sierra. She says, do you recommend a specific curriculum or book to use with moms to start talking about and educating about postpartum? That's a great question.
Yeah, so I listed several books on the resource page. Depending specifically on like kind of what they're experiencing. I love a podcast. I'm just in the car a lot. And so and even I found in my first postpartum seasons there wasn't I, I had difficulty opening up a book, and so it was either an Audible or a podcast, but I put several on there. Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts is one of my favorite. It just kind of normalizes the overwhelming, the intrusive thoughts, the anxiety thoughts. Um, but There's a ton. There's a ton of great resources, but they are specifically listed on the resource page for you. So I hope that's helpful. And if there's something specific that is not on that resource page, you feel free to email me and I can help you find what you're looking for.
I think that's great to mention to like the podcast or even Audible, because it's like that's something you can do
Yeah.
as you're walking baby around trying to console them, put your
Yes.
headphones in,
Yep.
it's great because it's really hard to sit down and hold a book open while you have a
Yes.
baby in the other
And
arm.
you're just falling asleep. It's like, what
Totally.
page are you on? Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll go ahead and close up. Thank you so much, Jaren, for answering all of our
Absolutely.
questions and for presenting and just making mental health services, so accessible and seem, so helpful. And yeah, thank you everyone for making time to attend our session and for contributing to our conversation today. And Jaren, for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.